Hello, Black Goats. Thank you for the message. That was insightful, gave me a little bit more information for what you're looking for. I just have a workbook here that I created that kind of mirrored part of your explanation. So this is how I figure you maybe have it set up now. Obviously, I presume with more information, but let's take a look. So we have a sheet here just called Ledger. And here you have your investors. This is the example you kind of gave where Tom is 5, Susie is 10, Mark 100, Tom 5 again. And with this, it is an official table, as I'm sure you have it since you're using a pivot table as well. I just called it Table Ledger. So on the Shareholders tab is where the pivot table currently is. And Mark 100, Susie 10, and Tom, sum of the amount was 10. So that matches basically the message you had sent to me. Then what you talked about is having like a contacts tab where maybe you have the name of the person, the email, and postal address. Obviously, this could be broken out further, but I just created one column here just to simulate. And as I understand it, you'd like to get this information kind of linked to your pivot table that you currently have. So one way to go about that is using the data model. So with the pivot table that you currently have, once you have it selected here in the cell, you'll see this area that says more tables. Your pivot table fields might look like this. I personally prefer the side-by-side layout. And you'll see why here in a moment as if you're working with large data sets. But you're going to click more tables. Do you want to create a new pivot table? Be created using the data model? Yes. You see it creates a new sheet down here and basically duplicated the same thing. But now what you're going to see as well is table contacts is here because this contacts tab, this also is an official table. I named it table contacts. It exists in this workbook. So this currently in the bold is part of our data model. What we need to do is link then the table contacts to the ledger. And we'll do that in Power Pivot here, where you can add to data model. We'll go to our contacts table here. And when I'm on that, I'm going to click this Add to Data Model. This opens Power Pivot. You'll see at the bottom we have our two table sources currently. What you're really going to want to pay attention to, though, is just diagram view. That's all we really care about here right now. When you click diagram view, you're going to see your two tables. Now, if you have this named the same, we know that investor in table ledger equals name in table contacts, but certainly you could have investor here or name. Ideally, what I would actually recommend is if you have like an investor or a name ID number, because for example, if you had two John Smiths, right now your pivot table is going off of the name. But if John Smith had an ID of 25 and other John Smith had an ID of 26, that makes them unique. So if you have that, you'd want to link up the ID numbers. But if you're going by name, if it's a small data set, there's not going to be repetition, then you're okay. We're just going to click and drag investor right over top of name here. And you're going to see that it creates here in the table context one to many relationship, meaning that the name of the name and context of which you should only have one record could show up multiple times in the ledger table, which is true. Like we have our Tom had, twice he was input at, I think it was the 5 units. So once you've made that connection, we can just close this. Now we'll go back to our new sheet that was created, and you're going to see now table contacts is here. We already have the name, it's investor, so we don't need to add that. But now you can drag email, maybe underneath investor, postal underneath that. And unless you've changed the layout, it's going to look like this. I personally don't like this layout, unless, of course, you do want to take advantage of, expanding and collapsing these rows. But personally, if we go to design while we're clicked on the pivot table, report layout, show in tabular form, this makes much more sense to me. We've got investor, email, and then the postal address. Just going to select everything and then double click in between the columns so that they resize correctly. I also don't like the subtotals in this instance. So again, design, subtotals, do not show subtotals. Now it's starting to look a little bit more like a table that we're used to, but it has the power of a pivot table. You might not need grand total either, or if you do, certainly leave it on, but you can take grand total off. And then since we have it in tabular form, we don't really have these, we don't really need these buttons to expand and collapse. So you can also, from the pivot table analyze, remove these plus minus buttons. And now it looks like a real table that we're kind of used to. So the benefit of this then is if we have more people added, let's say Molly comes in here with 200. If we just went here, I'm going to demonstrate this one, and we right click and refresh, or up at the data, you can refresh all here. Now we're going to see Molly comes in here blank. It's because she doesn't have any information to pull from the contact table. So we also need to put Molly here. Do that, molly@email.com, Molly Street, City. As long as it's part of the table, then again, we can just refresh. Now it shows up here. Ideally, pivot tables, I mean, if you're just kind of using it for the sum here, the unfortunate part is with the layout, unless you're changing some major settings, you can't really sort in this case, largest to smallest, because it's tied to here already. It's doing this kind of alphabetically. So you can, if that's important, you're kind of looking at each person alphabetically, then awesome. This whole thing could kind of be redone using also Power Query. Maybe if you're super interested, I can make a different video on that one. I feel like that allows a little bit more flexibility in your sorting, but I haven't seen your data set. I don't know specifically what you're analyzing. So this might be precisely what you're looking for. And if it is, awesome. The shareholders tab here, obviously you don't really need that anymore because we recreated it. So we could just delete this one. And yeah, let me know if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for something different, maybe we do need to bring in Power Query, but no, as long as you're keeping the context table updated and as ledgers come in, you can label this one obviously shareholders if that's what you had it as from your example. And then just refresh all. That should bring it in. Hope that helps.